The corporate phone vibrated against the coffee table with an insistence that Charlotte Davis could not ignore. Midnight on Friday, and that device, which normally remained in sepulchral silence on weekends, now demanded her attention with a disconcerting urgency. She watched the name flashing on the screen. Caleb Hunt, CEO. Her heart raced even before her mind fully processed the situation. No one received calls from Caleb Hunt outside of business hours. No one. Charlotte reached out, hesitantly, feeling the weight of that moment even without fully understanding it. The apartment in Portland was shrouded in darkness, only the soft light of the floor lamp creating elongated shadows on the white walls. She had spent the night reviewing financial reports, a half-empty bottle of wine beside her, her bare feet curled under her body on the gray velvet sofa. "Hello?" Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Are you alone?" The question came immediately, grave, laden with something Charlotte could not name right away. That voice. During the 8 months she had worked at Hunt Technologies, she had only heard it in corporate meetings, always formal, always distant. But now, through the phone line in the darkness of her apartment, it sounded different, intimate, dangerous. "I am." Charlotte straightened up on the sofa, her heart racing. "Did something happen? Is there an emergency at the company?" A pause too long. Charlotte could hear him breathe, and that simple sound triggered a cascade of sensations she was not prepared to feel. Her hands began to sweat. "Good. We need to talk about what happened today at the office." Charlotte's brain went into controlled panic mode, replaying every moment of the last 12 hours. The quarterly presentation had gone well. The numbers were impeccable. There were no errors in the reports she had sent. Nothing that would justify a personal call from the CEO at midnight. "Mr. Hunt, she began, but he interrupted her. "Caleb. When we are alone, you can call me Caleb." Charlotte felt her mouth dry. "When we are alone." The words floated in the charged air between them, even separated by miles of distance on that Portland night. "Caleb," she tested the name, feeling it strange and familiar at the same time. "I'm not sure I understand." "The elevator," he said simply, "this afternoon, at 4:23. Charlotte's world stopped. She remembered. Of course she remembered. How could she forget? She had exited the meeting on the 5th floor, frustrated with Marcus Pemberton's objections to her Asian market expansion project. Her mind was buzzing with unspoken counter-arguments, with data that proved her point, when the elevator doors opened and he was there. Caleb Hunt. Alone. Something rare in itself. She had entered without thinking, still lost in her thoughts, and only realized who shared that confined space when the doors closed. He was leaning against the side wall, tie loosened in a way she had never seen before. The sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his forearms. He looked tired. Human. Their gazes met in the mirrored reflection of the doors, and something happened. Something Charlotte could not rationally explain even now. It was not the usual seconds of polite recognition. It was long, impossible seconds in which the world reduced itself to that shared glance, to that acute awareness of the other's presence. She turned, unable to avoid it, and found him already looking directly at her. Not through the reflection, but for real. Dark gray eyes that seemed to see beyond the professional layers she had so carefully constructed. The elevator descended 10 floors, and neither of them said a word. But Charlotte felt every inch of distance between them like an electric current, alive and pulsing. When the doors finally opened on the ground floor, she exited quickly, her legs trembling, without looking back. She spent the rest of the day trying to convince herself that she had imagined it all. "You remember," Caleb said now, a statement, not a question. Charlotte stood up from the sofa, unable to stay still. She walked to the wide window overlooking the city lights, the phone pressed against her ear. "Mr. Hunt, I don't think this is appropriate." Caleb, she corrected, her voice lower. I don't understand what is happening. You understand perfectly. There was something new in his voice now. A raw vulnerability that disarmed all of Charlotte's defenses. I felt it the moment, and you felt it too. Charlotte closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cold glass of the window. All the rules that guided her professional life screamed at her to hang up, create distance, keep the boundaries intact. But something deeper, more primal, kept her there, listening. I spent the last 8 hours trying to rationalize, Caleb continued, and Charlotte could perfectly imagine him. Perhaps in his office on the top floor of the Hunt Technologies skyscraper, or maybe at home, in some elegant and minimalist place that suited him. Trying to find a logical explanation for why I can't get you out of my head. That's... Charlotte searched for the right words, but they all seemed inadequate. I work for you. There are policies, hierarchies. I wrote those policies. There was a touch of dark humor in his voice. And I am perfectly aware of how I am violating each one of them by making this call. Charlotte moved away from the window, returning to the sofa. She sat down slowly, trying to organize her thoughts amidst the whirlwind of emotions. Caleb Hunt was known for his impeccable control, his cold logic, his calculated decisions. The idea of him doing something impulsive, something that contradicted his own rules, seemed impossible. Why are you doing this, then? She asked, genuinely confused. Because, he paused, and Charlotte heard the sound of liquid being poured, perhaps whiskey into a glass. I am 37 years old. Charlotte, I built a company from scratch, made thousands of decisions that affected thousands of lives, maintained absolute control over every aspect of my existence. And then, you enter an elevator, and in 10 floors, completely unravel that control. Her name. He had said her name with a familiarity that should not exist between them. Charlotte felt a shiver run down her spine. You don't know me, she protested weakly. I'm just a financial analyst, one among hundreds. Do you really think I don't observe my team? There was intensity in his voice now. I know you came from the University of Michigan with double honors. I know you turned down offers from Goldman Sachs and McKinsey to work here. I know you live alone in an apartment in Pearl District, that you run at 6 in the morning every day at Waterfront Park, and that you have an exceptional talent for finding patterns where others see only numbers. Charlotte felt her blood freeze and boil at the same time. You investigated my life? I read the files of all executive-level employees. He sounded slightly defensive. It's part of my job. I'm not executive level. Not yet. The confidence in his voice was absolute. But you should be. Your project for Asian expansion is brilliant. Marcus Pemberton is a political idiot who wouldn't recognize innovation if it hit him in the face. Charlotte blinked, surprised. You watched the meeting? I watch many meetings that no one knows I'm watching. There was a smile in his voice now. And before you ask, no, I don't usually do this. But after the elevator, I found myself looking for reasons to know more about you. The silence that followed was laden with unspoken possibilities. Charlotte knew she should be the sensible one, the professional, the one who would end that conversation before they crossed an irreversible line. But as she held the phone in the darkness of her apartment, listening to Caleb Hunt's breath on the other side, all she could think about was those 10 floors of shared silence, that moment when the world had reduced itself to just 2 pairs of eyes, finding something unexpected in each other. What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The answer came without hesitation. Honesty. Tell me you felt nothing in that elevator, and I will never mention it again. We will return to our professional roles, and this conversation will never have happened. Charlotte closed her eyes, knowing that the next word out of her mouth would change everything. The truth weighed on Charlotte's tongue like molten lead. She could feel her pulse quickening at her temples, each beat echoing the magnitude of what she was about to admit. On the other end of the line, Caleb Hunt's silence was patient, but she could sense the underlying tension, like a string stretched to its limit. "I felt it," the words finally came out, breaking the barrier she had built for hours. "And I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything." The exhalation he released sounded almost like relief, as if he had been holding his breath for too long. Charlotte imagined him loosening his shoulders, perhaps running a hand through his dark hair in the way she had noticed, discreetly, in executive meetings. "Thank you," Caleb said, and there was something vulnerable in that gratitude that made Charlotte's heart tighten. For being honest. And now? Charlotte stood up again, unable to control the nervous energy coursing through her body. She walked to the small kitchenette, her bare feet silent on the light wood floor. "You have the answer you wanted. What changes?" "Everything." The answer came too quickly, too intensely. Caleb paused, and when he continued, his voice was more controlled. "Nothing. I don't know yet." Charlotte grabbed a glass, filling it with tap water, just to have something to focus her trembling hands on. The full moon cast silver shadows through the kitchen window, and she stood there watching Portland fall asleep, buildings punctuated by lit windows where other lives unfolded in their own private dramas. "This is madness," she said, more to herself than to him. "We haven't even had a real conversation. It was just 10 floors of silence." Sometimes 10 floors of silence say more than 1,000 words. There was a thoughtful quality in his voice now. "Do you know why I canceled my afternoon meetings?" Charlotte turned, surprised. "You canceled meetings?" 3 of them, including a video conference with investors from Tokyo that took weeks to schedule. She could hear him moving, perhaps pacing as well, both restless in their respective spaces. "I stayed in my office trying to work, but every time I looked at the numbers, I saw your eyes reflected in that elevator door." The confession was so unexpected, so contrary to the image of the impenetrable CEO Charlotte knew, that she didn't know how to respond. Caleb Hunt did not cancel meetings. He was known for his obsessive punctuality, his ability to compartmentalize, to separate the personal from the professional with surgical precision. "Why are you telling me this?" Charlotte asked, returning to the living room. She settled into the armchair this time, tucking her legs under her body. "You don't know me well enough to trust me with this vulnerability. Maybe that's exactly why." There was a raw sincerity in his words. "You don't want anything from me. You're not trying to impress, manipulate, or climb hierarchies." When we looked at each other in that elevator, there were no hidden agendas, just something real and frightening. Charlotte bit her lower lip, processing. He was right, of course. She was not one of the ambitious executives who circled Caleb at corporate events like sharks, smelling blood in the water. Her interest in Hunt Technologies had always been about the work itself, about the opportunity to implement innovative strategies, not about proximity to power. "Real and frightening sums it up well," she agreed. "I've been here for 8 months. I've built a reputation, relationships with colleagues, and now I'm having this completely inappropriate conversation with my CEO at—" She checked the clock. 12:43 on a Friday night. "Do you want me to hang up?" The question came calmly, without judgment. "I can do that. We can pretend this call never happened, keep everything professional." Charlotte closed her eyes, knowing she should say yes. The rational part of her brain screamed to end this before it got any more complicated. But there was another part, one she rarely acknowledged, that wanted to know where this conversation would lead. "No," she finally said. "I don't want you to hang up." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was charged with possibilities, with doors being opened instead of closed. Charlotte could hear the sound of something being placed on a hard surface, perhaps the glass of whiskey he had mentioned earlier. "Tell me something about you," Caleb said, and his voice had a different quality now, softer, something that's not in your employee file. Charlotte laughed, a low and surprised sound. "Is this your pickup technique? Asking for information like you're in a job interview?" Sorry. He really sounded regretful. It's been a long time since I did this, and I've never been particularly good at the social part. The admission was so unexpectedly charming that Charlotte felt her guard lower just a little more. She adjusted a pillow behind her back, getting comfortable. "That's okay," she said, deciding to be generous. "Here's something you don't know. When I was a child, I wanted to be a professional dancer. I trained for 12 years before realizing I loved dance, but not enough to live with the constant pain and brutal competition." "Dancer." She could hear him smiling. "That explains your posture. You walk differently from the other analysts, you know? As if every movement is choreographed." Charlotte felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You observe how I walk?" "I observe many things about you." There was no excuse in his voice. "The way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're focused. How you tap your pen 3 times on the table before asking a question in meetings. How you smile only with the left corner of your mouth when you're being polite, but don't agree." Charlotte's heart was racing again. That's a little creepy. Or romantic, depending on the perspective. There was humor in his voice now. "My turn. When I was 15, I hacked my school's grade system not to change my grades, but to fix an error on a classmate's report card who was about to lose a scholarship. Were you expelled?" "Almost. My father had to make a few calls. It was the last time I asked him for help." There was an old bitterness there, something unresolved. It was also when I realized I had a talent for codes and systems. The rest, as they say, is history. Charlotte knew the official story, of course. Everyone who worked at Hunt Technologies knew it. Caleb Hunt had founded the company at 22 in a garage in Seattle, developing a revolutionary encryption software. 15 years later, Hunt Technologies was worth billions, with offices in 20 countries. But that was the public narrative. What he was sharing now was different, more intimate. It was the 15-year-old boy who had risked everything for a stranger, the son who had learned early about family disappointment. "Your father," Charlotte began carefully. "You aren't close?" "My father wanted me to take over his business, traditional manufacturing. No innovation, just perpetuating what the previous generation built." Caleb sounded distant now. "When I refused and started my own company, he considered it a personal betrayal. We haven't spoken in 5 years. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was my choice. But there was pain there, buried under layers of control. Although, sometimes I wonder if the price of success was too high." Charlotte understood what he was not saying. The empire he had built came with sacrifices, with lost relationships, with a loneliness that no amount of money or power could fill. She saw it now, in that late-night call, in that need for genuine human connection. "Is that why you work late?" she asked softly. "Because there's no one waiting at home?" "Partially." He hesitated, then continued. "And partially because building something has always seemed safer than feeling anything." The vulnerability in that confession made something inside Charlotte break and reorganize. This was not the feared and respected CEO who commanded boardrooms with absolute authority. This was a man who had sacrificed human warmth on the altar of ambition and was just beginning to realize what he had lost. "Caleb," she said, testing the name again on her tongue, feeling it less strange this time. "What do we really want here?" The question hung between them, honest and necessary. Charlotte could hear his breathing changing, becoming deeper, as if he were gathering courage. "I want to know you," he finally said. "For real. Not as an employee, not through reports and presentations. I want to know why you run at 6 in the morning, whether it's to clear your head or if you just enjoy it. I want to understand what makes you genuinely smile, not that professional smile you wear in the office. I want to discover if those 10 floors were just a strange moment or the beginning of something neither of us was looking for." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and inconvenient. When was the last time someone had expressed the desire to truly know her? Not her qualifications, not her usefulness, but her, the person behind the carefully constructed professional facade. "And you," Caleb pressed. "What do you want?" The answer came more easily than Charlotte expected, as if it had been waiting to be recognized. "I want to stop being afraid," she admitted, "of feeling something real." The confession hung in the air between them like smoke, dense and impossible to ignore. Charlotte pressed the phone harder against her ear, as if that physical pressure could somehow anchor the reality that was disintegrating around her. On the other end of the line, Caleb Hunt's silence had changed, becoming slower, more deliberate. "Fear of feeling something real," he repeated her words, tasting them. "That's something I understand all too well." Charlotte stood up from the armchair, unable to remain still. Her feet carried her back to the window, where the lights of Portland twinkled like terrestrial stars. Somewhere out there, in one of the many lit buildings, Caleb Hunt was having the same conversation, sharing the same suspended moment in time. "When was the last time you were afraid of something?" Charlotte asked, genuinely curious. It was hard to imagine the man who commanded a billion-dollar corporation experiencing fear of anything. The silence that followed was long enough for her to think the connection had dropped. Then, finally, "Today, at 4:23 in the afternoon." His voice was laden with something that Charlotte could only describe as dark admiration. "When I realized I couldn't stop looking at you, and that all the walls I built over the last 15 years meant absolutely nothing." Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. She pressed the palm of her free hand against the cold glass of the window, letting the temperature keep her present, preventing her from floating away into the unreality of that moment. "You speak as if this is something negative," she observed carefully. "It's not negative. It's terrifying." She could hear him moving, the sound of footsteps on what seemed to be wooden flooring. "I built my entire life on control, Charlotte. Every decision calculated, every risk measured. And then you get into an elevator and make me question everything." The vulnerability in his words was so raw that Charlotte felt a wave of tenderness completely inappropriate for the situation. She shouldn't be feeling this for her CEO. She shouldn't be in this conversation. But as she watched her own ghostly reflection in the glass of the window, she recognized something within herself that had been dormant for far too long. "Want to know what I thought when I saw you in that elevator?" Charlotte said, surprised by her own courage. "I thought you looked tired, not physically, but as if you were carrying a weight that no one else could see." Caleb let out a short, humorless laugh. Very perceptive for a first impression. It wasn't the first impression. Charlotte stepped away from the window, returning to the sofa where everything had started less than an hour ago. "I watched you too, you know, during executive meetings. Always so controlled, so inaccessible. But sometimes for a fraction of a second I see something different, as if there's a whole person hidden behind that corporate facade. And that attracted you?" There was genuine curiosity in his voice now. Charlotte considered the question honestly. "It intrigued me, but if I'm honest, I tried not to think too much about it. You're my CEO. There's a clear line that shouldn't be crossed. And yet, here we are, crossing every imaginable line." "And yet," Charlotte agreed softly. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was contemplative, as if they were both processing the magnitude of what was happening. Charlotte picked up the wine glass she had abandoned before the call, swirling the dark liquid as she organized her thoughts. "Can I ask a question?" she finally said. "Anything. Why now? Why today after 8 months? If you noticed something before, why never?" She let the question hang, not wanting to push too hard. Caleb sighed, a long, tired sound. "Because there was always some excuse. An important project, a pending merger, meetings with investors. Always something more urgent than admitting what I was feeling." He paused. "But today, after the elevator, I realized I was simply afraid. And I hate being afraid." Charlotte smiled despite herself. "So you called me at midnight on a Friday like some kind of confrontation with your fears. When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. A little, she admitted, but there was warmth in her voice. Although I must admit there's something admirable about acting despite fear. Or something completely insane. There was genuine humor in his voice now. My therapist would have a field day with this. Charlotte blinked, surprised. You have a therapist? Every Thursday at 5. He didn't sound the least bit embarrassed. I started 2 years ago after I realized I was canceling social events to stay in the office. She's always saying I need to reconnect with my humanity, whatever that means. The image of Caleb Hunt in therapy was so incongruous with his public persona that Charlotte had to stifle a laugh. And this call? Does this count as reconnecting with your humanity? Considering I spent the last 8 hours mentally debating the pros and cons, analyzing scenarios, trying to predict every possible outcome, and then just gave up and called without a real plan? He paused. I'd say it's the most human act I've committed in years. Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight and tense since she answered the phone. There was something deeply comforting in knowing he was as lost as she was, as out of his element. So neither of us knows what we're doing, she said, more a statement than a question. Absolutely no idea. He sounded almost relieved to admit it. Charlotte, I need to be honest with you about something. The serious tone made her heart race again. Okay? I'm not good at this. Relationships, connection, vulnerability. I've had 3 significant relationships in my life, all of which ended because, according to them, I was emotionally unavailable, which is probably true. He took a deep breath. I'm warning you because if we continue this conversation, if we explore whatever this is between us, it's going to be complicated. Not just because of company policies, but because I'm fundamentally deficient in this area. Charlotte should have been running in the opposite direction. All the warning signs were flashing, and yet she found herself saying, I appreciate the honesty, but you're assuming I'm some kind of expert at this. My last relationship ended 2 years ago because he said I was married to my work, and he wasn't wrong. She smiled sadly. Maybe we're both emotionally deficient. Caleb laughed, a genuine and unexpected sound that made Charlotte smile. A perfect pair of lost causes. Exactly. Charlotte settled deeper into the sofa, surprised at how comfortable she felt now, despite the surreal nature of the situation. So, what do we do? 2 emotionally constipated workaholics who might feel something for each other. We start slow, Caleb suggested, his voice becoming more thoughtful. No expectations, just see where it leads. Slow, Charlotte repeated, testing the idea. And on Monday. When I go back to the office? On Monday, he paused, clearly thinking. On Monday we act professionally. We keep up appearances, but... He hesitated. But maybe we could have dinner together. Outside the office, away from curious eyes. Just 2 people getting to know each other. Charlotte bit her lip, considering. It was a dangerous line to cross. But the alternative was to pretend this conversation never happened, to return to the status quo. And she knew with a certainty that surprised her that she couldn't do that. A dinner, she finally said, but somewhere discreet. I can't have rumors circulating in the office. I know a place, a small restaurant in West Hills, away from downtown. The owner owes me a favor. There was palpable relief in his voice. Saturday night? Saturday works. Charlotte looked at the clock, surprised to see it was already past 1 in the morning. They had been talking for over an hour, and it felt both much longer and shorter simultaneously. Charlotte? Caleb's voice became softer. Yes? Thank you for not hanging up, for being honest, for this. He sounded almost shy, a quality so incongruous in the powerful CEO that Charlotte felt her heart tighten. Thank you for calling, she replied sincerely. Even if it's completely insane. Especially because it's completely insane. She could hear him smiling. You should sleep. It's late. You should too. I'll try. There was a pause, heavy with everything they hadn't said. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Caleb." Charlotte sat in the dark for a long time after the call ended, the phone still in her hand, trying to process what had just happened. Her life, so carefully ordered and controlled, had been turned upside down in an hour. And the scariest part was that she didn't want to go back. For the first time in years, Charlotte Davis felt completely alive, completely present, and completely terrified of what that could mean. Saturday arrived with torturous slowness. Charlotte spent the day trying to keep herself busy, reorganizing her closet twice, running 10 kilometers instead of the usual 5, cleaning an apartment that was already spotless. Nothing disguised the anxiety that grew like a tide in her stomach. By 5 in the afternoon, she finally admitted defeat and began to get ready. Choosing an outfit proved more complicated than any financial presentation she had ever prepared. Too formal suggested she was trying too hard to impress. Too casual could seem disrespectful. After 20 minutes and 8 discarded options spread across the bed, Charlotte finally opted for a simple navy blue dress that ended just above the knees, paired with a soft leather jacket that added a touch of informality. Discreet, yet elegant. Professional, but not corporate. As she applied a light layer of makeup, Charlotte critically observed her own reflection. Her brown eyes seemed brighter than usual. Her cheeks flushed in a way that had nothing to do with the blush she was applying. She was nervous, she recognized. More nervous than she had been in years. The last time she felt that flutter in her stomach was during her thesis defense in Michigan, and even that didn't come close to the intensity of what she felt now. The phone vibrated at 6:45, punctually. A message from a number she had already saved as Caleb during the week, although they had exchanged only brief professional confirmation since that midnight call. "A black car will pick you up in 15 minutes. I know I said we could meet there, but I prefer to ensure you arrive safely." Charlotte smiled despite her nerves. She had insisted on driving to the restaurant, maintaining some level of independence, but there was something comforting in his concern. She quickly replied, "I'll see you there." When she descended from the building 15 minutes later, there was indeed a black sedan waiting, discreet and elegant without being ostentatious. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair, opened the back door with a professional nod. "Miss Davis." "My name is Robert. Mr. Hunt asked me to take you safely." Charlotte slid into the soft leather seat, her fingers nervously tracing the stitching as the car navigated the streets of Portland. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected in the windows of the buildings. The city seemed different today, laden with possibilities that hadn't existed a week ago. The drive to West Hills took about 25 minutes, moving away from the bustling downtown towards the wooded hills surrounding Portland. The restaurant, when it finally appeared, was exactly as Caleb had promised. Small, discreet, hidden among tall trees. The stone facade was illuminated by soft lights, and Charlotte could see through the large windows that the interior was cozy, with no more than 10 tables. Robert opened the door for her, and Charlotte stepped out of the car, with legs that felt less stable than she would like to admit. The entrance to the restaurant was just a few steps away, but she paused, taking a deep breath of the cool night air, trying to calm the nerves that threatened to overwhelm her. The door opened before she could reach it, and then he was there. Caleb Hunt in person was even more striking than Charlotte remembered. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater that hugged his shoulders in a way that made her mouth go dry. Without the armor of corporate suits, he seemed younger, more approachable, but no less intimidating. His dark gray eyes found hers immediately, and Charlotte saw something pass through them, something that made her heart skip a beat. Charlotte. His name sounded different in his voice live, richer, more real than over the phone. "I'm glad you came." "You thought I wouldn't?" She tried to keep her tone light as she approached. "I considered a 50% possibility." There was a touch of humor in his voice, but also genuine vulnerability. I wouldn't have blamed you if you changed your mind. They stood there for a moment, just a few steps apart, and Charlotte felt the same electric current she had experienced in the elevator, only amplified by the proximity, by the deliberate intention of that meeting. Caleb extended his hand, not to formally greet her, but simply as an invitation. Charlotte accepted it, and the warmth of his palm against hers sent waves of awareness through her arm. "Shall we go in?" he said softly. "I promise the food is worth the trip out here." The interior of the restaurant was even more charming than it appeared from the outside. Exposed brick walls were adorned with black and white photographs of Portland over the decades. Flickering candles lit each table, and soft jazz music played low enough to allow for intimate conversations. Charlotte noticed that there were only 3 other occupied tables, all couples seemingly absorbed in their own worlds. An Italian-looking man, perhaps in his 60s, approached with a warm smile. "Caleb, my friend. It's been a long time." "Marco." Caleb shook the man's hand with genuine familiarity. "It has been a long time indeed. This is Charlotte Davis." Marco's dark eyes sparkled with barely concealed interest as he looked between them. "A pleasure, Miss Davis. Any friend of Caleb's is always welcome. Your table is ready, as you requested. The restroom is in the back." They were guided through a narrow corridor to a small room separated from the main dining area by a thick velvet curtain. There was only one table there, positioned near a window that offered a stunning view of the city lights below. It was intimate, without being claustrophobic, romantic, without being overdone. Caleb pulled out the chair for Charlotte, an old-fashioned gesture that made her smile. "Gentlemen," she remarked as she sat down. "Occasionally." He settled into the chair opposite her, and for the first time, Charlotte saw him look slightly uncomfortable. "I must admit, I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Dinner, casual conversation, no corporate agendas or meeting structures." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Charlotte was beginning to recognize as his indicator of nervousness. "Usually, when I have dinner with someone, there's a clear business purpose." The disarming honesty made Charlotte relax a little. If he was nervous, she wasn't the only one navigating uncharted waters. "Well, I'm not an expert at this either, so how about we just talk, like we did on the phone?" "Talk." Caleb considered this, then nodded. "That seems manageable." Marco reappeared with a bottle of red wine, presenting the label to Caleb with approval. "Brunello di Montalcino, vintage 2010. As we discussed." After the glasses were poured and Marco discreetly left, Caleb raised his. "A toast?" Charlotte raised hers as well. "To what?" "To 10 floors of silence." His eyes met hers over the rim of the glass, intense and sincere. "And to the courage to see where they take us." Charlotte touched her glass to his, the crystal sound echoing softly in the private room. The wine was rich and complex, warming her chest as it went down. She studied the man across from her, noticing details she had never had the chance to observe before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his shoulders began to relax as the wine took effect, the way his fingers absently traced the base of the glass, a nearly hypnotic movement. "So," Caleb began after a moment, "tell me about your morning. What does Charlotte Davis do when she's not analyzing numbers or being invited to improbable dinners by her CEO?" Charlotte laughed, surprised by the genuinely interested tone. "Today? I obsessively cleaned my apartment and reorganized my closet twice while deciding what to wear. You look perfect." The words came out naturally, without the inflection of cheap flattery. Just an honest observation that made Charlotte blush. "And you?" she asked, shifting the focus. "How does powerful Caleb Hunt spend his Saturdays? Normally? Working." He grimaced. "But today I spent 3 hours at the gym trying to burn off nervous energy, then another 2 rewriting a text message to you approximately 15 times before just sending it." The image of him, so controlled in every professional aspect, Agonizing over a simple text message was so unexpectedly human that Charlotte felt something completely loosen in her chest. They were just two people, she realized. Two complicated adults trying to figure out something that no business manual could teach. 15 times? She teased gently. And what was the first version? Caleb groaned, but there was humor in his eyes. Do you really want to know? Absolutely. It was closer to a corporate itinerary. It included precise arrival times, suggested dress codes, and a proposed agenda for the evening. He shook his head, laughing at himself. My therapist would have a fit. Charlotte laughed genuinely now, the remaining tension evaporating. God, we're both disasters, aren't we? Perfectly matched disasters. Caleb reached across the table, not completely, but enough to be an invitation. Charlotte accepted without hesitation, their fingers intertwining in a way that felt surprisingly natural. Marco returned at that moment, breaking the moment, but not the mood, taking their orders with efficient discretion. When they were alone again, Charlotte found herself studying the man across from her with renewed curiosity. Can I ask something? She said. Anything? Why have you never married? The question was bold, but the atmosphere of honesty between them seemed to allow it. Caleb didn't seem offended, just thoughtful. I've never found someone who wanted the man instead of the brand. Or maybe I've never let anyone get close enough to make the distinction. His eyes found hers. And you? Why is someone so remarkable dining with her awkward CEO instead of having suitors lining up? Maybe because suitors lining up has never been something that interested me. Charlotte squeezed his hand gently. And maybe because awkward CEOs who call at midnight admitting vulnerability are more appealing than men who pretend to have all the answers. The smile that lit up Caleb's face was genuine, transforming his features in a way that Charlotte knew few people had the privilege to witness. In that moment, sitting in that private room as the night settled over Portland, Charlotte realized she was crossing a threshold. There was no turning back now, only the path ahead, uncertain and terrifying, and completely inevitable. The conversation flowed with a surprising ease as the dishes arrived and were savored between comfortable pauses. Charlotte discovered that Caleb had a dry, self-deprecating sense of humor that rarely surfaced in the corporate environment. He, in turn, seemed genuinely fascinated by her childhood stories in Detroit, by the way she described the industrial city with a fondness that transcended its economic struggles. My mother worked 3 jobs, Charlotte shared, swirling the wine in her glass as memories surfaced. But she always found time to take me to ballet rehearsals. Sometimes she would sit in the reception area, sleeping in the chair because she was too exhausted to go home and come back. She never complained. Not once. Caleb watched with an intensity that made Charlotte feel seen in a way no one else had. Does she still live in Detroit? She passed away 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. The pain was still there, though less acute now, more of a scar than an open wound. It was quick, at least, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Part of me is grateful for that she didn't suffer for long. Caleb's hand, still holding hers across the table, squeezed gently. I'm sorry. She would be proud of what you've accomplished. I hope so. Charlotte blinked quickly, brushing away the unexpected tears. Sorry, I didn't mean to make this so heavy. Don't apologize. There was something fierce in his voice now. This is real. It's you. It's exactly what I want to know. Charlotte looked at him, really looked, and saw absolute truth in his eyes. There was no performance there, no social facade. Just Caleb Hunt, the man, not the CEO, genuinely interested in every layer of her that she chose to reveal. Your father, she began cautiously, shifting the focus. You mentioned that you haven't spoken in 5 years. Does that still bother you? Caleb leaned back slightly, though he didn't release her hand. His expression grew more distant, and Charlotte could see the layers of defense forming automatically. But then he took a deep breath and deliberately lowered them again. Every day, he admitted. Not because I miss him specifically, but for the idea of what could have been. I'm 37 and have built an empire, but there's still a part of me, that 15-year-old boy who hacked the school system, who wants his father's approval. He smiled without humor. My therapist says it's one of my main emotional blocks. Your therapist sounds wise. She is. She's also brutally honest, which is simultaneously helpful and uncomfortable. Caleb swirled his wine, watching the dark liquid. She pointed out that I build empires instead of relationships because it's safer. I can control a company. I can't control how people make me feel. The vulnerability in that confession made Charlotte's heart tighten. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them. And now? How are you feeling now? Caleb's eyes met hers, and there was something raw and unfiltered in them. Terrified, hopeful, more alive than I've felt in years. He paused, and completely out of my element. Welcome to the club. Charlotte smiled, squeezing his hand. We're both founding members. Marco chose that moment to reappear, presenting dessert with a dramatic flourish. Homemade tiramisu that melted in the mouth, accompanied by small cups of espresso. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought as they savored the last moments of the meal. Charlotte, Caleb eventually said, his spoon pausing midway to his mouth. I need to ask something. The serious tone made her stomach twist slightly. Okay. What happens on Monday? He set the spoon back on the plate, his full attention on her. Do we go back to the office and pretend that this, he gestured between them, doesn't exist? Or do we try to navigate this alongside our professional lives? It was the question Charlotte had been avoiding, even knowing it was inevitable. The reality of their situation, so easy to ignore in the intimate atmosphere of that hidden restaurant, would come roaring back on Monday morning. I don't know, she admitted honestly. The company policies are clear about relationships between superiors and subordinates. Technically, you're my boss several layers above. Technically, yes. Caleb nodded, his expression thoughtful. But in practice, you don't report directly to me. There are at least 3 levels of management between us. That still creates a power imbalance. Charlotte hated being the voice of reason, but someone had to be. And what if this goes wrong? My credibility in the office could be destroyed. People might think that any promotion or recognition I receive is because I'm involved with the CEO. Caleb's jaw tightened, and Charlotte could see frustration crossing his features. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled. You're right. And I hate that you're right. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress. I don't want to jeopardize your career. You've worked too hard for this. But? Charlotte could feel the but coming. But I also don't want to give this up before we really explore what it is. He looked directly at her. So I propose the following. We remain discreet for now. Nothing at the office, nothing that could be interpreted as favoritism. If we meet outside of work, away from prying eyes, and if we get to the point where this becomes something more serious, we handle the HR issues appropriately. Charlotte processed the proposal, looking for flaws, for reasons why it wouldn't work. But the logic was solid, and more importantly, it showed that he was willing to protect her career as much as he was to explore what was between them. Discreet, she repeated. Does that mean we can't even look at each other in the office? A slow smile spread across Caleb's face, transforming his features in a way that made Charlotte's stomach flip. I didn't say that. It just means we need to be careful. His eyes sparkled with something mischievous. Though I admit it will make executive meetings significantly more interesting. Charlotte laughed, surprised by the lightness she felt. There was something thrilling about the idea, she realized. The shared secret, the stolen glances, the double life of public professionalism and private intimacy. It was risky, probably reckless, but also completely irresistible. So are we doing this? She asked. Officially exploring this? If you want to. Caleb extended his hand again, and Charlotte took it without hesitation. No pressure, no expectations. We just see where it leads us. Where it leads us, Charlotte echoed, feeling the weight and promise of those words. Marco returned with the bill, which Caleb discreetly handled while Charlotte pretended not to notice the probably hefty zeros involved. They stood up from the table together, and Charlotte felt the loss of the warmth of his hand as he released it to help her with her jacket. The night had cooled by the time they exited the restaurant, Portland stretching below them in a carpet of twinkling lights. Caleb's car, a sleek black Tesla that Charlotte should have anticipated, was parked discreetly nearby. Robert and the sedan that had brought her were already gone, she noted. "Can I take you home?" Caleb offered, his voice low in the quiet of the night. Charlotte knew she should refuse, maintain some boundary, but found herself nodding. Okay. The interior of the Tesla was silent and comfortable, all sleek technology and soft leather. Caleb drove with the same controlled precision he applied to everything, navigating the curves of the hills with practiced ease. Charlotte watched his profile in the flickering light of the street lamps, memorizing the line of his jaw, the way his hands held the steering wheel. "What are you thinking?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the road. "That a week ago, you were just my CEO," Charlotte replied honestly. "A distant figure I saw in occasional meetings. And now you're driving me home after our first date." Technically, it wasn't our first date. There was humor in his voice. It was our second. The elevator was the first. 10 floors of glances constitute a date. They were the 10 most significant floors of my life. He shot her a quick look before returning to the road. "So yes, I count it as a date." Charlotte smiled, warmed by the sincerity in his words. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the city passing by in a blur of lights and shadows. "Caleb," she said eventually. "Yes? Thank you. For tonight, for being honest, for not trying to be someone you're not." He reached out, finding hers in the space between them, intertwining their fingers. "Thank you for seeing me. Not the corporate persona, but who I really am." When they arrived at her building in the Pearl District, Caleb parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, they just sat there, hands still intertwined, neither wanting to be the first to break the bubble of intimacy they had built. "Can I see you again?" Caleb finally asked. "Outside of the office, I mean." "I'd like that." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "But Caleb." "Yes. Slowly, remember. Let's do this right." He nodded, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her fingers, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that it made Charlotte's heart race. "Slowly," he agreed, "though I should warn you that I'm terribly impatient when I want something." Charlotte exited the car feeling both light and heavy at the same time, as if she were floating and anchored simultaneously. She turned at the door of the building, finding Caleb still watching her through the windshield. He waved, a simple gesture that somehow seemed to carry promises of everything yet to come. As she ascended to her apartment, Charlotte knew she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Monday would bring its own challenges, its own tests of how much they could keep their professional and personal lives separate. But for now, in this suspended moment between dinner and reality, she allowed herself to simply feel the inexplicable happiness that came from having found something unexpected in the last places she would have looked. Monday arrived shrouded in morning fog, Portland waking slowly as Charlotte Davis walked through the revolving doors of Hunt Technologies at 7:45 in the morning. 15 minutes earlier than her usual time, a deliberate attempt to avoid the crowded elevators and curious glances that her newly acquired paranoia insisted would come. The marble lobby was nearly empty, just a few dedicated employees punctuating the expansive space. Charlotte waved to Marcus from security, who returned with a sleepy smile and headed to the elevators with a determination she didn't feel internally. Her heart raced as the polished steel doors opened, memories of that date a week ago surfacing with visceral intensity. The elevator was empty. Charlotte stepped in, pressed the button for the 12th floor where her department was located, and watched her reflection in the mirrored doors. She looked normal, professional in her charcoal gray suit and white blouse, brown hair neatly pinned in a low bun. Nothing about her outward appearance betrayed the internal turmoil, the way her stomach twisted at the thought of seeing Caleb in the corporate hallways. Discreet, she reminded herself. They had agreed to be discreet. Her phone vibrated as the elevator passed the 5th floor. A message from an unsaved number, just digits she had already memorized. Good morning. Hope you slept better than I did. Charlotte bit her lower lip, suppressing the smile that threatened to form. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating the appropriate response when the elevator stopped abruptly on the 7th floor. The doors opened to reveal Amanda Chen from accounting and 2 junior analysts whose names Charlotte always confused. Charlotte. Amanda entered with her characteristic energy, short black hair bouncing. How was your weekend? Did you do anything interesting? The innocent question made Charlotte's stomach leap. Nothing much. Ran, cleaned the apartment, the usual. The lie came smoothly, practiced, even as her thumb absently traced the phone she still held. And you. Amanda launched into an elaborate story about a blind date disaster as the elevator ascended the last floors. Charlotte nodded at the appropriate moments, murmured sympathetic comments, all on autopilot, while her mind remained divided between the present conversation and the unanswered message burning in her phone. When she finally reached her desk, a sleek workstation near the large windows overlooking the Willamette River, Charlotte began to gather her things with mechanical movements. Coffee first, she decided. Always coffee first. She needed the caffeine to navigate what promised to be an emotionally complex day. The 12th floor break room was deserted when Charlotte entered, the espresso machine humming its familiar tune. She prepared a double latte, watching the dark liquid swirl with steamed milk in hypnotic eddies, and allowed herself a moment of quiet before finally responding to Caleb's message. I eventually slept. Interesting dreams. She paused, then added, How was your morning? The response came almost instantly. Board meeting at 8. Trying to focus on financial reports when my mind is occupied with other things, or other people. The warmth that spread through Charlotte's chest had nothing to do with the hot coffee. She was typing a response when the break room door opened, revealing James Whitmore, the chief operating officer, and one of the senior executives who reported directly to Caleb. Charlotte. James waved, heading to the coffee machine with the familiarity of someone who used it often. Early today. Preparing something big? Just catching up on some reports. Charlotte quickly tucked her phone away, hoping the gesture didn't seem as guilty as she felt. The quarterly analysis doesn't write itself. James laughed, adding 3 packets of sugar to his coffee in a way that made Charlotte cringe internally. Speaking of which, I heard rumors that Caleb is impressed with your Asian expansion project. Marcus Pemberton apparently received some pretty direct feedback about unfounded objections. Charlotte's blood froze and boiled simultaneously. Caleb had mentioned knowing about her project, but the idea of him actively defending her to other executives was both comforting and terrifying. Would it be interpreted as favoritism? Would people start asking questions? I didn't know that, she said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. But I'm glad the project is being taken seriously. It should be. James took a long sip of his sugary coffee. It's solid work. Caleb knows how to recognize talent when he sees it. He paused at the door, turning with a smile. Between us, I think you're on the list for a promotion. Just a matter of time. When James left, Charlotte was alone again, her coffee cooling forgotten in her hands. The conversation should have left her feeling happy, validated in her work. Instead, she felt only rising anxiety. How much of Caleb's attention to her project was genuine merit versus personal interest? And more importantly, would others start asking the same question? Her phone vibrated again. Are you okay? I notice when you go quiet, even through text messages. The observation was so insightful, so attentively tuned to her already, that Charlotte felt something tighten in her chest. She quickly typed, "James Whitmore mentioned you defending my project. People will notice, Caleb." The response took longer this time. Charlotte imagined him in his conference room on the top floor, surrounded by board members, trying to discreetly check his phone. When the message finally arrived, she could feel the frustration even through the text. "Your project has merit, independent of anything personal. I defended it before Saturday. Marcus is a corporate politician who blocks good ideas out of fear they'll make him look outdated. I won't apologize for recognizing exceptional work." Charlotte read the message 3 times, processing. He was right, logically. The Asian project was solid, months of research and analysis proving its viability. And yet, the doubt lingered, planted by years in corporate environments where she had seen how personal relationships tarnished professional reputations. "You're right. Sorry, just nervous about how to navigate this." She hit send before she could rethink. "I am too. It's worth it. You're worth it." The words lingered with Charlotte as she returned to her desk, warming her against the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm. She opened her laptop, diving into reports and spreadsheets, allowing the familiarity of the numbers to anchor her. Work was something she understood, something controllable, when everything else felt terribly uncertain. Hours passed in a blur of data and analysis. Charlotte had lunch at her desk, a salad from the restaurant on the ground floor that barely registered in taste. By 2 p.m, her phone rang with an internal call. Rebecca Torres, Caleb's executive assistant. "Charlotte Davis," she answered, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Hi, Charlotte. Rebecca Torres from Mr. Hunt's office. He's requesting your presence in a meeting at 3 regarding the Asian expansion project. Can you attend?" The professional voice of Rebecca revealed nothing, but Charlotte felt the weight of the request. A meeting with Caleb, in his office, surrounded by others, maintaining professional facades, pretending they hadn't shared intimate confessions just 2 days ago. "Of course, Rebecca. I'll be there." "Great. Executive conference room, 25th floor. Bring any supporting materials you have on the project." Charlotte hung up and immediately began gathering documents, double-checking prints, organizing presentations on her laptop. Keeping busy avoided thinking too much about what was about to happen, about the challenge of being in the same space as Caleb while maintaining the appropriate professional distance. 15 minutes before 3, Charlotte found herself in the elevator again, this time ascending instead of descending. The 25th floor was executive territory, all sleek design and reverent silence. She rarely came here, her responsibilities typically not requiring access to the upper levels of corporate hierarchy. Rebecca greeted her with an efficient smile, gesturing to one of the glass-walled conference rooms that offered panoramic views of Portland. "They should be arriving shortly. Feel free to take a seat." The room was impressive even by Hunt Technologies standards. A polished walnut conference table dominated the space, surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs. Touchscreens embedded in the walls promised state-of-the-art presentation capabilities. Charlotte chose a chair in the middle of the table, not too close to the head where she presumed Caleb would sit, but not so far that it seemed she was avoiding proximity. Voices in the hallway alerted her to imminent arrivals. James Whitmore entered first, waving in recognition. He was followed by 2 executives Charlotte recognized from previous meetings, Patricia Lim from International Expansion and David Kowalski from Market Strategy. They all settled in, exchanging brief conversations while organizing their own materials. And then Caleb entered, and the air in the room changed subtly. He wore a navy suit that Charlotte didn't remember seeing before, the silver-gray tie perfectly matching his eyes. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his fingers through it during the previous board meeting. When his gaze swept the room, pausing imperceptibly on Charlotte for a fraction of a second, she felt that familiar electric current, that acute awareness that defied all professional protocol. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Caleb began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone Charlotte recognized from corporate meetings. This was CEO Caleb Hunt, not the man who had admitted to being terrified and hopeful during dinner 2 days ago. We need to discuss the proposed Asian expansion project and establish a timeline for implementation. He took his place at the head of the table, and the meeting began with formality. Charlotte presented her findings with practiced precision, guiding the group through market analyses, financial projections, and proposed implementation timelines. She was in her element here, confident in her command of the material, and could feel the approval in the room as she navigated questions and objections with ease. Caleb observed silently for the most part, only occasionally interrupting with penetrating questions that demonstrated his deep understanding of both the data and the broader strategic implications. When their eyes met across the table, there was only professionalism there, no indication of the intimacy they shared. It should have been comforting. Instead, Charlotte found herself strangely melancholic at the need for masks. The projections are conservative, Patricia Lim noted, studying the numbers on her tablet. Personally, I think we are underestimating the growth potential in the Vietnamese market. I agree, David Kowalski added, but I appreciate the cautious approach. It's better to underpromise and overdeliver than the opposite. Charlotte noted the comments, engaging in discussions about adjustments and refinements. The conversation flowed professionally, everyone contributing perspectives that strengthened the overall project. It was only when James Whitmore made a seemingly casual remark that Charlotte's stomach tightened. I must say, Caleb, you have shown particular interest in this project. Have you received anything from Marcus Pemberton about it? The silence that followed lasted only a second, but to Charlotte it felt like an eternity. She kept her eyes fixed on her notes, not daring to look at Caleb, aware of how everyone in the room was suddenly attentive. I received feedback from Marcus expressing concerns, Caleb said coldly, his voice revealing nothing. Concerns I deemed unfounded after thoroughly reviewing Charlotte's research. This project has strategic merit, regardless of who proposed it. If Marcus has issues with data-driven decisions instead of corporate politics, he can discuss it with me directly. The tone was unequivocally final, closing off the line of questioning without being defensive. Charlotte felt a wave of gratitude mixed with apprehension. He was protecting her, defending her work, but the very need to do so highlighted the challenges ahead. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, establishing action steps and timelines. When it finally ended, everyone stood up, gathering their materials. Charlotte was putting away her laptop when Caleb's voice stopped her. Charlotte, can you stay a moment? I have some follow-up questions about the fourth quarter projections. The others left, Patricia casting a curious glance before disappearing into the hallway. Then it was just the two of them, separated by meters of conference table and all the complications they had chosen to embrace. Caleb didn't say anything immediately. He moved to the wide windows, looking out over Portland below, hands in his pockets. Charlotte recognized the posture, the way his shoulders remained tense even as he feigned casualness. There really aren't any questions about the fourth quarter projections, are there? She said softly. No. He turned to face her, and the corporate mask had slipped, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. I just needed a moment. Seeing you here, so professional, so completely in your element, after Saturday night. He paused, searching for words. It's surreal. Charlotte felt the weight of the words hanging between them, the physical distance of the conference room feeling both too vast and insufficient. She remained where she was, her fingers still resting on her closed laptop, aware of how precarious that moment was. Anyone could walk down the hallway, look through the glass walls and see something that shouldn't be there. Caleb, she began carefully, keeping her voice low even in the relative privacy. We can't do this here. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture Charlotte already recognized as frustration mixed with vulnerability. But spending 90 minutes pretending you're just another analyst presenting reports was harder than I imagined. Charlotte understood perfectly. Throughout the meeting, she had felt the weight of his attention even when he maintained a neutral expression. his awareness brushing against her skin like electricity. It was exhausting to keep up the professional facade when every fiber of her being wanted to acknowledge what they shared. "It was a good presentation," Caleb continued, his tone shifting to something more professional, even as his eyes remained intense. "Patricia was right about the Vietnamese market. You should consider adjusting the projections." "I will do that." Charlotte allowed herself a small smile. "Is that what you're doing now, mixing professional feedback with stolen personal moments?" "Apparently, it's the only way I know how to do this." He returned the smile, but there was an underlying tension there. "Charlotte?" About James's comment. He was testing the waters, looking for something. Her stomach tightened. "I noticed. We need to be more careful." Caleb stepped closer, not too much, but enough for Charlotte to feel the warmth of his presence. "I can't publicly defend your work without people starting to ask questions, and that's not fair to you." The injustice of the situation hit Charlotte with renewed force. Her project had real merit, months of impeccable research, and yet any recognition she received now would be tainted by suspicions of favoritism. It was exactly the scenario she had feared since that midnight call. "So what do we do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Do you stop supporting valid projects because we happen to be exploring something personal?" "Not at all." The answer came firm and immediate, but perhaps I need to be more strategic about how that support manifests. Work through James or Patricia, let them be the public advocates while I keep my distance. Charlotte processed this, recognizing the logic even as she hated the necessity. "And if people find out anyway, Portland isn't that big. Someone could see us together. Then we'll be even more careful about where we meet." Caleb glanced over his shoulder, checking the empty hallway beyond the glass walls. "Charlotte, I know this isn't ideal. I know I'm asking a lot, that you're taking on most of the risk here. It's not just about risk." Charlotte finally moved, taking a few steps toward the windows, keeping a safe distance from him as she organized her thoughts. "It's about building something in secret, always looking over our shoulders. How long can we sustain this before it becomes suffocating?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to fully confront. Through the glass, Portland stretched out under the afternoon sun, the city indifferent to the human dramas unfolding in its skyscrapers. "I don't know," Caleb admitted, and the raw honesty in his voice made Charlotte's heart tighten. "But I know I'm not ready to give up before we really try." Charlotte turned to face him fully, studying the lines of tension around his eyes, the way he held his shoulders rigid even while trying to appear relaxed. This man who commanded a billion-dollar corporation with absolute authority was clearly out of his element, navigating emotional territory without the certainties that the business world offered. "Neither am I," she finally said, the admission coming easier than she expected. "But Caleb, we need to establish clear boundaries, rules that protect us both." He nodded, shifting into a more analytical mode that Charlotte recognized. "All right. Let's think of this as a strategic plan. What are the parameters?" Despite the seriousness of the situation, Charlotte couldn't help but let out a small smile. Of course, he would frame their relationship in corporate terms. It was probably the only way he knew how to process something so complex. "First, no personal contact in the office," she began, gathering her thoughts. "No messages during work hours unless it's strictly professional. If we need to communicate, we do it through personal calls after hours." "I agree." Caleb pulled out his phone, actually taking notes as if they were in a business meeting. "Second, decisions about my work need to go through others before they reach you. James or Patricia can review and approve before it gets to your desk. It creates a layer of separation." "Smart," he typed quickly. "Though I hate putting barriers between recognizing good work and the person who produced it. It's necessary." Charlotte crossed her arms, watching him work. "Third, and perhaps most importantly, if at any point this starts to negatively affect my reputation or career, We need to reconsider everything." Caleb stopped typing, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "You have my word. Your career comes first, always. Even if it means ending this before it really starts. Even then." But there was pain in his voice, a reluctance that mirrored what Charlotte felt. "Though I will do everything in my power to ensure it doesn't come to that." Charlotte believed him. She could see the sincerity etched in every line of his face. But she also understood the corporate reality better than she wished. Rumors had a life of their own, and once they started, they were nearly impossible to contain. "When can I see you again?" Caleb asked, putting his phone away. "Appropriately, I mean. Not in meetings where I have to pretend you're not the most interesting person in the room." The warmth that spread through Charlotte's chest was dangerously comforting. "How about Wednesday night? There's an art exhibit at the museum I wanted to see." "Art?" Caleb grimaced. "I must confess my knowledge of art is embarrassingly limited." "Then I'll educate you." Charlotte grabbed her laptop and bag, preparing to leave before they were alone too long. 7 o'clock? I can meet you there." 7 works. He kept a physical distance, but his eyes followed her every move. "Charlotte?" "Yes?" "Thank you for being patient with this, with all the complications." Charlotte paused at the door, looking back. "Thank you for making it worth it." She left before either could say more, aware of Rebecca watching with barely concealed interest from her desk. Charlotte maintained a neutral, professional expression, just another employee leaving a meeting with the CEO. Nothing to see here. The rest of the week passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Charlotte dove into adjusting the projections for the Asian project, incorporating Patricia's suggestions and building more robust analyses of the Vietnamese market. The work was comforting in its concreteness, something tangible when everything else felt suspended in uncertainty. Caleb maintained the perfect distance in the office. They crossed paths only once, on Thursday in the lobby, and he simply waved with the same distant cordiality he would offer any employee. Charlotte returned the gesture equally, ignoring how her heart raced just at the sight of him. The evening messages were different. After 6, when they both left the office, their phones came alive with conversations that ranged from deep to absurd. Caleb shared stories from his early days building the company, the doubts and fears no one else knew. Charlotte opened up about her mother, about the weight of being the first in her family to achieve so much, about the constant fear of not being enough. "You are more than enough," he wrote one night. "Your mother would know that. She would see you now and marvel at what you've built." Charlotte read that message 3 times before going to sleep, allowing herself to believe, if only for a moment, that it was true. Wednesday finally arrived, bringing a light rain that was characteristic of Portland in the spring. Charlotte chose dark jeans and a wine-colored sweater, casual but polished, appropriate for a museum without seeming like she was trying too hard. She arrived 5 minutes late on purpose, not wanting to appear too eager. Caleb was waiting near the entrance, hands in the pockets of a leather jacket that made him look years younger. He didn't see her immediately, and Charlotte had a moment to observe him unguarded. There was tension in his shoulders even at rest, a constant vigilance that likely came from years of building and defending his empire. Then his eyes found hers, and something in him softened, relaxed. He smiled, genuine and unfiltered, and Charlotte felt any residual apprehension melt away. "Hello," she said, approaching. The desire to touch him, to greet him properly was strong, but they were in public, always in public. "Hello." His eyes roamed over her, appreciative but respectful. "Ready to educate me about art?" "Totally prepared." Charlotte gestured toward the entrance. "I warn you that I might be a demanding teacher." The exhibit was contemporary photography, black and white images of Portland through the decades. They wandered through the galleries side by side, close enough that their arms almost brushed, but never enough to cross that line. Charlotte shared what she knew about composition and light, while Caleb asked surprisingly insightful questions about perspective and artistic intent. "Look at this one," Charlotte said, stopping in front of a photograph from 1985 showing Portland's industrial district. "The way the photographer captured the light through the factory windows makes you feel both hope and decay simultaneously." Caleb studied the image silently. "My father had a factory in an area like this. It closed 10 years ago. He couldn't compete with overseas manufacturing." There was something somber in his voice. He blamed my generation for valuing innovation over tradition. Charlotte looked at him, seeing the old pain he rarely showed. That must have been complicated, building something new while he lost his legacy. It was. Caleb moved away from the photograph, heading to the next one. It still is, in a way. Success doesn't erase guilt. They continued through the exhibit, the conversation flowing between observations about art and deeper confessions. Charlotte discovered that Caleb had a keen eye for details she hadn't noticed herself, while he seemed genuinely fascinated by her interpretations of the works. When they finally left the museum, the rain had stopped, leaving Portland washed and gleaming under the streetlights. They walked aimlessly, maintaining a respectful distance while navigating the wet sidewalks. "Can I ask something?" Caleb said eventually. "Always. Are you happy? With this? With what we're trying to build here?" Charlotte considered the question honestly. Happy feels like too simple a word for something so complicated. But yes, scared, anxious, constantly worried that we're going to mess everything up, and yet happier than I've been in a long time. The smile that lit up his face was gratifying. Good. Because this, tonight, just walking and talking, it's the most normal I've felt in years. They stopped at a corner, the traffic light reflecting in puddles at their feet. Charlotte knew they should part ways, that every additional minute together in public was a risk. And yet, she stood still, reluctant to end the night. "Caleb?" "Yes?" "It's worth it. The complications, the secrecy, all of it, it's worth it." He didn't respond with words. Instead, he did something unexpected, bold, completely inappropriate, and absolutely perfect. Under the pretense of bending down to tie his shoe, he pressed a small piece of paper into her hand, his fingers brushing against hers for just a second. Charlotte waited until she was in the car to unfold it. The handwriting was firm and clear. "Your apartment, Friday at 8? I'll cook, or at least try. See." She laughed to herself in the car, the tension of the week finally releasing. He was going to cook. The billionaire CEO, who probably had personal chefs at his disposal, wanted to cook for her. It was absurd and charming, and exactly the kind of thing Charlotte had never imagined when she accepted that midnight call weeks ago. Her phone vibrated with a message. "Did you get home safe?" "Yes, and about Friday?" "Yes," Charlotte typed quickly, smiling. "I hope your cooking skills are better than your knowledge of art. Prepare for disappointment, but I promise it will be memorable in some way." Charlotte drove home through the wet streets of Portland, feeling something settle in her chest. They were really doing this, navigating the impossible, building something amidst complications that would be easier to avoid. And for the first time since that midnight call, she felt a sense of hope.